Hey guys, I wanted to do a reading of the Iliad, which I have here, in the old style, similar to how I did Spencer's Ruins of Rome, a sort of Elizabethan style pronunciation of the Iliad. It was the most famous translation of it until we got to Alexander Pope's translation of the Iliad just over a century later. So this one came out in 1598, and George Chapman's Odyssey came out in 1616. So they were really the earliest cohesive translations that gained in popularity in England, and was the first way that they heard it. The English population would have heard the Iliad go out. So I'm going to just do a live recitation of it, and I'll probably scroll down through it as I go through it so you guys can read along. But really, this is more just an oral experience. So let's just share the screen. And you can see here, Chapman, as in the style at the time, starts with the epistle dedicatory. The immortal memory of the incomparable hero Henry, Prince of Wales, who tragically later died. So this was added back to the complete Homer, which came out in 1616, which would be after the death of Henry Frederick, the first son of James I. Thy tomb arms statue, all things fit to fall at foot of death and worship funeral. Form hath bestowed, for form is not too dear. Thy solid virtues yet eternized here. My blood and wasted spirits have only found commanded cost and broke so rich a ground, not to enter, but to make thee ever spring, as arms, tombs, statues. Every earthy thing shall fade, aid vanish into fume before. What last thrives least, yet wealth of soul is poor, and so 'tis kept, not thrice sacred will, signed with thy death, moves any to fulfill. Thy just bequests to me, thou dead, and then I, live dead, for giving thee eternity. And then he later adds, to all times future this time's mark extend, Homer no patron found, nor Chapman friend. Ignotis nimis omnibus, sat notis moritor sibi, which is a sort of play on Seneca, that all we know of is that we will die. And here's his original dedication, which would have come out in the 1598 version, in which Henry is still alive. To the high-born prince of men, Henry, thrice royal, inheritor to the United Kingdoms of Great Britain, etc. Since perfect happiness by princes sought is not with birth born nor exchequers bought, nor follows in great strains, nor is possessed with any outward state, but makes him blessed that governs inward, and beholdeth there all his affections stand about him bare, that by his power can center tower and death, all traitorous passions marshalling beneath his justice, his mere will, and in his mind, holds such a scepter as can keep confined his whole life's actions in the royal bounds of virtue and religion and their grounds, takes into so his honors, his delights, in complete empire. You should learn these rights, great prince of men, by princely precedents, which here in all kinds my true zeal presents, to furnish your youth's groundwork and first state, to let you see on godlike man create all sorts of worthiest men to be contrived in your worth only, giving him revived, for whose life Alexander would have given one of his kingdoms, who, as sent from heaven, thinking well that so divine a creature would never more enrich the race of nature, kept as his crown his works and taught them still his angels in all power to rule his will, and would affirm that Homer's poesy did more advance his Asian victory than all his armies. Oh, 'tis wondrous much, through nothing prize, that right virtuous touch of a well-written soul to virtue moves, nor have we souls to purpose, if their loves of fitting objects be not so inflamed. How much then while this kingdom main-souled maimed, to want this great inflamer of all powers that move in human souls. All realms but yours are honoured with him, and hold the blessed that state, that have his works to read and contemplate, in which humanity to her height is raised, which all the world yet none enough hath praised, seas, earth, and heaven he did in verse comprise, outsung the muses, and did equalize their king Apollo. Being so far from cause of princes' light thoughts, that their gravest laws may find stuff to be fashioned by his lines, through all the pomp of kingdom still he shines, and graceth all his graces. Then let die your lutes and viols, and more loftily make the heroics of your Homer sung, to drums and trumpets set the angel's tongue, and with the princely spot of hawks you use, behold the kingly flight his high muse. And see how like the phoenix she renews her age, and starry feathers in your sun, thousands of years attending every one, blowing the holy fire and throwing in their seasons, kingdoms, nations they have been subverted in them. Laws, religions, all, offered to king and greedy funeral, you still your Homer, lasting, living, reigning, and proves how firm truth builds in poets' feigning. A prince's statue, or in marble carved, or steel or gold enshrined to be preserved aloft on pillars or pyramids, time into lowest ruins may depress, but drawn with all his virtues in learned verse, fame shall resound them on oblivion's hearse, till graves gasp with her blasts and dead men rise. No gold can follow where true poesy flies. Then let not this divinity in earth, dear prince, be slighted as she were the birth of idle fancy, since she works so high, nor let her poor disposer learning lie still bid read. Both with being in men defaced, in men with them is God's bright image raced. For as the sun and moon are figures given of his refulgent deity in heaven, so learning and her bright lightner poesy in earth present his fiery majesty. Nor are kings like him, since their diadems thunder and lighten, and project brave beams, but since they his clear virtues emulate in truth and justice, imagine his state, in bounty and humanity, since they shine, than which is nothing like him more divine, not fire, not light, the sun's admired course, the rise nor set of stars, nor all their force, in us and all this cope beneath the sky, nor great existence termed his treasure eye. Since not for being greatest he is blessed, but being just and in all virtues best, what sets his justice and his truth best forth, best prince then use best, which is poesy's worth. For as great prince well informed and decked with gracious virtue, give more sure effect to her persuasions, pleasures, real worth, than all the inferior subjects he sets forth. Since there she shines at full, hath birth, wealth, state, power, fortune, honour, fit to elevate her heavenly merits, and so fit they are, since she was made for them, and they for her. So truth with poesy's grace is fairer far, more proper, moving, chaste, and regular, than when she runs away with untrust prose, proportion that doth orderly dispose her virtuous treasure, and is queen of graces in poesy, decking her with choicest phrases, figures, and numbers, when loose prose puts on plain letter habits, makes her trot upon dull earthly business. She, being mere divine, holds her to homely cates and harsh hedge wine, that should drink poesy's nectar every way, one made for other as the sun and day, princes and virtues, as in spring the pliant water moved with anything that fall into it, puts her motion out in perfect circles that move round about. The gentle fountain, one another raising, so truth and poesy work, so poesy blazing, all subjects fallen in her exhaustless fountain, works most exactly, makes a true account of all things, to her high discharges given, till all be circular and round as heaven. And lastly, great prince, mark and pardon me, as in a flourishing and ripe fruit tree, nature hath made the bark to save the bowl, the sap, the deck, the whole. With leaves and branches they to bear and shield these for fruit, the fruit itself to yield, God to the kernel, and for that all those, since out of that again the whole tree grows. So in our tree of man, his very nervy root springs in his top, from thence even to his foot. There runs a mutual aid through all his parts, all joined in one to serve as queen of arts, in which doth poesy, like the kernel, lie obscure. Through her Promethean faculty, can create men and make even death to live, for which she should live, honoured kings should give. comfort and help to her, that she might still hold up their spirits and virtue, make the will that governs in them to the power conformed, the power to justice, that the scandal stormed against the poor dame, cleared by your fair grace, your grace may shine the clearer. Her low place, not knowing her, the highest leaves obscure. Who raise themselves, and he sits sure, whom her wing hand advanceth, since on it eternity doth crowning virtue sit, all whose poor seeds, like violets in their beds, now grow with bosom hung and hidden heads, for whom I must speak, though their fate convinces me, worst of poets, to you, best of princes, by the most humble and faithful implorer for all the graces to your highness, eternitized by your divine Homer, George Chapman. To the sacred fountain of princess soul, empress of beauty and virtue, and queen of England. With whatsoever honor we adorn your royal issue, we must congratulate you, imperial sovereign, who of you is born as you, one tree, make both the bow and bough. If it be honor, then, to join you both to such a powerful work that shall defend both from foul death as age's ugly moth, this is an honor that shall never end. They know not virtue then, that know not what the virtue of deafening virtue is. It comprehends the God of all your state, joins your greatness to as greater bliss. Shield virtue and advance her then, great queen, and make this book your glass to make it seen. Your majesties in all subjection most, your humbly consecrate George Chapman. And finally, he gives a dedicatory to the reader. Lest with foul hands you touch these holy rites, and with prejudices too profane pass Homer in your other poets' lights, wash here in this porch to his numerous fane. Here ancient oracles speak and tell you whom you have to censure. First then Silius here, who thrice was consul in renowned Rome, whose verse, saith Martial, nothing shall outwear. And then he quotes Silius Italicus here. He in Elysium, having cast his eye upon the figure of a youth whose hair with purple ribbons braided curious lie, hung on his shoulders wondrous bright and fair, said, Virgin, what is he whose heavenly face shines past all others as the morn the night, whom many marvelling souls from place to place pursue and haunt with sounds of such delight, whose countenance, what not the Stygian shade, would make me questionless believe he were a very god. The learned virgin made this answer, if thou shouldst believe it here, thou shouldst not err, he well deserved to be esteemed a god. Nor held his so much breast a little presence of the deity. His verse comprised earth, seas, stars, souls at rest. In song the muses he did equalize, and on a Phoebus he was only soul. Saw all things sphere in nature without eyes, and raised your Troy up to the starry pole. Glad Scipio, viewing well this prince of ghosts, said, Oh, if fates would give this poet leave to sing the acts done by the Roman hosts, how much beyond would future times receive the same facts made by any other known. O blessed Achilles, to have the grace that out of such a mouth thou shouldst be shown to wandering nations as enrich the race of all times future with what he did know. Thy virtue with his verse shall ever grow. Now hear an angel sing for poet's fame, whom fate for his divine song gave that name. And here he goes, Angelus Politianus in Nutrica. More living than in old Demodocus, fame glories to wax young in Homer's verse. And as when bright Hyperion holds to us his golden torch, we see the stars disperse, and every way fly heaven in the pallid moon, even almost vanishing before his sight. So with the dazzling beams of Homer's sun, all with other ancient poets lose their light, whom when Apollo heard out of his star, singing the goal-like act of honored men, and equaling the actual rage of war, with only the divine strains of his pen, he stood amazed and freely did confess himself of equalled in Leonides. Next here the grave and learned Pliny uses censure of our sacred poet's muse, from Pliny's Natural History, turned into verse that no prose may come near Homer. Says Chapman, Whom shall we choose, the glory of all wits, held through so many sorts of discipline, and such a variety of works and spirits, but Grecian Homer, like whom none did shine, for form of work and matter? And because our proud doom of him may stand justified by noblest judgment, and receive his applause, in spite of envy and illiterate pride, great Macedon amongst his matchless spoils, tucked from rich Persia on his fortunes cast a casket finding, full of precious oils, formed of all gold, with wealthy stones enchased. He took the oils out, and his nearest friends asked in what better guard it might be used. All giving their conceits to several ends, he answered his affections rather choosed, and use quite opposite to all their kinds, and Homer's books should with that guard be served, that the most precious work of all men's minds in the most precious place might be preserved. The fount of wit was Homer's learning sire, and gave antiquity his living fire. Volumes of like praise I could heap on this, of men more ancient and more learned than these. But since true virtue enough lovely is with her own beauties, all the suffrages of others I omit, and would more fain that Homer for himself should be beloved, who every sort of love worth did contain, which how I have in my conversion proved, I must confess, I hardly dare refer to reading judgments, since so generally custom hath made even the ablest agents err in these translations, so all must apply their pains and cunning word for word to render their patients authors, and they may as well make fish with fowl, camels with whales, and gender, or their tongue speech and other mouths compel. For even as a different production ask Greek and English senses in their sounds, and letters shun one form and unison, so have their sense and elegy bounds, and their distinguished natures then require only judgment to make both consent in sense and elocution, and aspire and reach spirit that was spent in his example, as with art to pierce his grammar and etymology of words. But as the great clerks can write no English verse, because alas, great clerks, English affords, say they, no height nor copy, a rude tongue, since 'tis their native, but in Greek or Latin their writs are rare, for thence true poesy sprung. Though them truth knows that they have but skill to chat in, compared with that they may say in their own, since thither t'others foul soul cannot make the ample transmigration to be shown in nature's loving poesy, so the break those translators stick in that effect their word-for-word traductions, where they lose the free grace of their natural dialect, and shame their authors with the forced gloss I laugh to see, and yet as much abhor more license from them words that may express if they'll compression make the clear author, from whose truth, if you think my feet digress, because I use needful paraphrases, read Vala Hessus, that in Latin prose and verse convert him. Read the Messines, that in Tuscan turns him, and the gloss grave Salel makes in French as he translates, which for the aforesaid reasons all must do, and see my conversion much abates the license they take, and more shows him too, whose right all great learned men have done in some main parts, that war his commenters, but as the illustration of the sun should be attempted by the erring stars, they failed to search his deep and treacherous heart, cause since they wanted the fit key of nature in their downright strength of art with poesy to open poesy, which in my poem of the mysteries revealed in Homer I will clearly prove, that whose near birth suspend your calumnies and far-wide imputations of self-love. 'Tis further from me than the worst that reads, professing me the worst of all that write, yet what, in following one that bravely leads, the worst may show, that this proof hold the light, but granted clear, yet hath the traction got my blind side in the form my verse puts on, much like a dunghill mastiff that dares not assault the man he barks at, but the stone he throws at him takes in eager jaws and spoils his teeth because they cannot spoil. The long verse hath by proof received applause beyond each other number, and the foil that squint-eyed envy takes is censured plain, for this long poem asks this length of verse, which I myself ingenuously maintain. Too long are shorter authors to rehearse, and for our tongue that still so impaired is, by travelling linguists I can prove it clear. that no tongue hath the mused utterance aired for verse, and that sweet music to the ear, struck out of rhyme, so naturally as this are monosyllables, so kindly fall and meet opposed in rhyme as they did kiss, French and Latin, most immetrical. Their many syllables in harsh collision fall as they break their necks, their bastard rhymes saluting as they jostled in transition, and set our teeth on edge, nor tunes nor times kept in their falls, and methinks their long words skew and short verse, as in a narrow place two opposites should meet with two-hand swords, unwieldy without use or grace. Thus having rid the rubs and strode these flowers in our thrice sacred Homer's English way, what rests can make him yet more worthy yours? To cite more praise of him were mere delay. To your glad searchers, what those men found that gave us his praise, past all so high a place, whose virtue was so many and so crowned by all the consents divine, that not to grace or add increase to them, the world doth need another Homer. But even to rehearse and number them, they did not so much succeed. Men thought him not a man, but his verse some mere celestial nature did adorn. And all may well conclude that it could not be that for the place where any man was born, so long and mortally could disagree so many nations as for Homer strived, unless his spur in them had been divine. Then end their strife, and love him thus received as born in England. See him overshine all other country poets, and trust this, that whosoever muse dares use her wing, when his muse flies, she will be trussed by his, and show as if a barnacle should spring beneath an eagle. In none since was seen a fowl so full of heaven as earth's in him. Oh, if our modern poesy had been as lovely as the lady he did limn, what barbarous worldling grovelling after gain could use her lovely parts with such rude hate as now she suffers under every swain, since then 'tis naught but her abuse and fate that thus impairs her. What is this to her, as she is real? Or in natural right, but since in true religion men should err, as much as poesy should the abuse excite, like contemplate of her divinity, and that her truth and right saints sacred merits in most lives breed but reverence formally. What wonder is't if poesy inherits much less observance, being but agent for her and singer of her laws? Let others say, forth then, ye moles, sons of earth, abhor her. Keep still on the dirty vulgar way, till dirt receive your souls, to which ye vow, and with your poisoned spirits bewitch our thrifts. Ye cannot so despise us as we you. Not one of you above his molehill lifts his earthy mind, but as a sort of beast, kept by their guardians, never care to hear their manly voices, but when their fists they brave wild whistles, and the beast's rude ear hear their curs barking, then by heaps they fly headlong together. So men beastly given the manly soul's voice, sacred poesy, whose hymns the angels ever sing in heaven, contemn and hear not. But when brutish noises for gain, lust, honor, and litigious prose are bellowed out and crack the barbarous voices of Turkish stentors, oh, ye lean to those, like itching horse to blocks or high maypoles, and break naught but the wind of wealth all in your documents. Your asinine souls, proud of their burthens, feel not how they go. But as an ass, that in a field of weeds affects a thistle, and falls fiercely to it, that pricks and galls him, yet he feeds and bristles, bleeds, forbears a while, and licks, but cannot woo it to leave the sharpness, when to wreck his smart, he beats it with his foot, then backward kicks, because the thistle galled his forward part, nor leaves till all be beat. For all the pricks then falls to others, with as hot a strife as in that honourable war doth waste the tall heat of his stomach and his life. So in this word of weeds, you worldling taste your most loved dainties, which such war by peace. Hunger for torment, virtue kick for vice. Cares for your states do with your states increase, and though ye dream ye feast in paradise, Yet reason's daylight shows ye at your meat, asses at thistles, bleeding as ye eat. And then we have a later preface to the reader, which I think I'll skip for now, and we'll just go straight into the first book. The argument. He starts each book with an argument to get us to know what we're about to see. In book 1, as laid out in this Iliadic book here, more modern translation by E.V. Ryu. It's just a Penguin Classics. Really, the first book, all we're talking about is Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks' expeditionary force, has given as booty to the daughter of a local priest Apollo. He is forced to return her and demands a replacement. After a furious quarrel with Achilles, he takes Briseis, Achilles' prize, and thus the two turn against each other. And here's the argument as Chapman puts it. Apollo's priest to the Argive fleet doth bring gifts for his daughter prisoner to the king, for which attended freedom he entreats, but being dismissed with contumelious threats, at Phoebus' hand by vengeance prayer he seeks, to have a plague inflicted on the Greeks, which had Achilles doth a counsel cite, emboldening Calchas in the king's despite, to tell the truth, why they were punished so, from hence their fierce and deadly strife did grow. For wrong in which Achilles so raves, that goddess Thetis from her throne of waves, ascending heaven of Jove, assistance won, to plague the Greeks by absence of a son, and make the general himself repent. So wrong, so much his army's ornament, is found by Juno, she with Jove contends, till Vulcan with heaven's cup the quarrel ends. Alpha the prayer of Croesus sing, the army's plague, the strife of kings. Achilles' baneful wrath resound, O goddess, that imposed infinite sorrows on the Greeks, and many brave souls lost. From breasts heroic sent them far to that invisible cave that no light confronts, and their limbs to dogs and vultures gave, to all which Jove's will gave effect, from whom first strife began betwixt Atreides, king of men, and Thetis, his godlike son. What god gave Eris their command, and up that fighting vein, Jove's and Latona's son, who fared against the king of Maine, for continually shown his priests infectious sickness sent, to plague the army, and to death by troops the soldiers went. Occasions thus, Croesus the priest came to the fleet to buy, for presents of unvalued price, his daughter's liberty, the golden scepter and the crown of Phoebus in his hands, proposing and made suit to all, but most to the commands of both the Atreides, who most ruled great Atreus' sons, said he, and all ye well-grieved Greeks, the gods whose habitations be in heavenly houses, grace your powers with Priam's razed town, and grant ye happy conduct home, to win which wished renown of Jove by honouring his son, far-shooting Phoebus deign, for these fit presents to dissolve the ransomable chain of my loved daughter's servitude. The Greeks entirely gave glad acclamations, for sign that their desires would have the grave priest reverenced, and his gifts of so much price embraced. The general yet bore no such mind, but viciously disgraced. With violent terms the priest and said, Dotard avoid our fleet, while lingering be not found by me, nor thy returning feet. Let ever visit us again, lest nor thy godhead's crown nor sceptre save thee. Her thou seek'st I still will hold mine own, till age deflower her in our court at Argos, far transferred from her loved country, she shall ply her web, and see prepared. With all fit ornaments my bed incense me, then no more, but if thou wilt be safe, be gone. This said the sea-beat shore. Obeying his high will, the priest trod off with haste and fear, and walking silent till he left far off his enemy's ear. Phoebus, fair-haired Latona's son, he stirred up with a vow to this stern purpose. Hear thou, God, that bearest the silver bow, that Chrysa guardst ruled Tenedos with strong hand and the round. Celia most divine dost walk, O Smintheus if crowned. With thankful offerings thy rich fane I ever saw, offered fat thighs of oxen and of goats to thee this grace desired. Vouchsafe to me pains for my tears, let these rude Greeks repay, forced with thy arrows. Thus he prayed, and Phoebus heard him pray, and vexed at heart, down from the tops of steep heaven stooped to his bow, and quiver covered round his hands did on his shoulders throw. And of the angry deity the arrows as he moved rattled about him. Like the night he ringed the host and roved, apart the fleet set, terribly, with his hard loosing hand, his silver bow twanged, and his shafts did first the mules command. And swift hounds, then the Greeks themselves, did his deadly arrows shot, the fire's death never went out. 9 days his shafts flew hot about the army, and the 10th Achilles called a court of all the Greeks. Heaven's white-armed queen, who everywhere cut short, beholding her loved Greeks by death, suggested it, and he, all met in one, arose and said, Atrides, now I see, we must be wandering again, flight must be still our stay, if flight can save us now, at once sickness and battle lay. Such strong hand on us, let us ask some prophet, priest, or prove, some dream interpreter, for dreams are often sent from Jove. Why Phoebus is so much incensed, if unperformed vows he blames in us, or hecatombs, and if these knees he bows, to death may yield his graves no more, but offering all supply of savours burnt from lambs and goats, avert his fervent eye, and turn his temperate. Thus he sat, and then stood up to them, Calchas, surnamed Thestorides, of augurs the supreme. He knew things present, past, to come, and ruled the equipage of the Argive fleet to Ilion for his prophetic rage, given by Apollo, who, well seen until they spent, proposed to this to Achilles. Jove's beloved what thy charge see disclosed. The secret of Apollo's wrath? Then covenant and take oath. To my discovery that with words and powerful actions both thy strength will guard the truth in me, because I well conceive that he whose empire governs all, whom all the Grecians give confirmed obedience, will be moved. And then you know the state of him that moves him, when a king hath once marked for his hate a man inferior. Though that day he wrath seems to digest, the fence he takes, yet evermore he rakes up in his breast hands of quicker anger, till revenge hath quenched to his desire the fire reserved. Tell me then, if whatsoe'er ire suggestion heard of me to him thy valour will prevent. Achilles answered, all thou knowst to speak, and be confident, for by Apollo, Jove's beloved, to whom performing vows, O Calchas, for the state of Greece thy in spirit prophetic shows, skills that direct us. Not a man of all these Grecians here I living and enjoyed the light shot through the flowery sphere shall touch thee with offensive hands, though Agamemnon be the man in question, that doth boast the mightiest emperor of all our army. Then took heart the prophet unreproved, and said, they are not unpaid vows, nor hecatombs that moved the gods against us. His offence is for his priest impaired by Agamemnon, that refused the priests the present he preferred, and kept his daughter. It is cause why heaven's far darts these plagues among us. And this still will empty in our hearts his deathful quiver uncontained, till to her loved sire the black-eyed damsel be resigned, and no redemptory hire took for her freedom, not a gift, but all the ransom quit. And she conveyed with sacrifice till her enfranchised feet tread Chrysa under. Then the gods, so pleased, perhaps we may move to remission. Thus he Satan up. The great in sway, heroic Agamemnon rose, eagerly bearing all. His mind's seat overcast with fumes, and anger general filled all his faculties. His eyes sparkled like kindling fire, which sternly cast upon the priest. Thus vented he his ire. Prophet of ill, for never good came from thee towards me, not to a word's worth, never more thou took'st delight to be. offensive in thy auguries, which thou continuest still, now casting thy prophetic goal, and vouching all our ill. Shot from Apollo is imposed, since I refuse the price of fair Chryseis' liberty, which would in no words rise to my rate of herself, which moves my vows to have her home. Past Clytemnestra, loving her, and graced my nuptial room with her virginity and flower, nor ask her merits less, for person, disposition, wit, and skill in housewife rest. And yet, for all this shall she go, if more conducible that course be than her holding here. I rather wish the weal of my loved armies than to death. Provide yet instantly supply for her, that I alone of all our royalty lose not my winnings. 'Tis not fit, ye see, all I lose mine. Forced by another, see as well some other may resign his prize to me. To this replied the swift-foot, godlike son of Thetis, thus: King of us all, in all ambition, most covetous of all that breathe, why should the great-souled Greeks supply thy lost prize out of theirs, nor what they avarice seeks? Our common treasury can find, so little it doth guard, of what our raised towns yielded us, of all which most is shared and given in our soldiers, which again to take into our hands, what ignominious and base. Now then, since God commands, part with thy most loved prize to him, not to any of us. Exact it of thee. Yet we all lost, thou sufferest thus. Will treble, quadruple, and gain when Jupiter bestows the sack of well-walled Troy on us, which by his own word he owes. Do not deceive yourself with wit, he answered, godlike man. Though your good name may colour it, 'tis not your swift foot can outrun me here, nor shall the gloss set on it with the gold. Persuade me to my wrong, wouldst thou maintain in sure abode thine own price, and slight me of mine? Resolve this: if our friends, as fit in equity my worth, will right me with amends, so rest it. Otherwise myself will enter personally on thy prize, that of Ithacus or Ajax for supply. Let him on whom I enter rage. But come, we'll order these hereafter, and in other place. Now put the sacred seas, our black sail, in it rouse, put in it fit sacrifice. And to these I will make ascend my so much envied prize, bright-cheeked Chryseis, for conduct of all which we must choose a chief out of our counsellors. Thy service we must use, Idomeneus, Ajax, thine, or thine, wise Ithacus, or thine, thou terriblest of men, thou son of Peleus, which fittest war, that thou mightst see these holy acts performed, for which thy cunning zeal so pleads. And he whose bow this stormed, for our offences may be calmed, Achilles with a frown thus answered: O thou impudent, of no good but thine own, ever respectful, but of that with all crafts covetous. With what heart can a man attempt a service dangerous, or at thy voice be spirited to fly upon a foe, thy man thus wretched? For myself, I was not injured so by any Trojan that my powers should bid them any blows. In nothing bear they blame for me. Thea, whose bosom flows with corn and people, never felt impair of her increase. By their invasion, hills enow, and far resounding seas pour out their shades and deeps between. But thee, thou frontless man, we follow, and thy triumphs make with bonfires of our bane. Thine and thy brother's vengeance sought, thou dog's eyes of this Troy. By our exposed our lives, whose desert thou neither dost employ with honour nor with care. And now thou great'st to force from me the fruit of my sweat, which the Greeks gave all, and though it be compared with thy part, then snatched up nothing, nor is ever is that any stack down but of fight, and the fetching of this my hands have most share, in whose toil, when I have emptied me of all my forces, my amends and liberality. Though it be little, I accept, and turn pleased to my tent. And yet that little thou esteem'st too great a continent, in thy incontinent avarice here. Therefore now in course is, since 'tis better far than here to endure, that thou shouldst still be ravishing my right, draw my whole treasury dry, and add dishonour. He replied, If thy serve thee, fly. Strain not for my cause, others here will aid and honour me. If not, yet Jove I know is sure, that counsellor is he, that I depend on. As for thee, of all our Jove-kept kings, thou still art most my enemy. Strife's battles bloody things, make thy blood feast still, but if strength that these moods build upon flow in thy nerves, God gave thee it, and so 'tis not thine own, but in his hand still, that when lifts thy pride in this so high, home with thy fleet and myrmidons use their empery. Command not here, I weigh thee not, nor mean to magnify thy ruffian rages, but instead I must for-threaten thee. Since Phoebus needs will force me from Chryseis, she shall go. My ships and friends shall waft her home, but I will imitate so his pleasure, that mine own shall take in person from thy tent, bright-cheeked Briseis, and so tell thy strength how eminent my powers, being compared with thine, all other making fear to vaunt equality with me, or in this proud kind bear their beards against me. Thetis' son at this stood vexed, his heart bristled his bosom, and two ways drew his discursive part. If from his thigh his sharp sword drawn, he should make room about Atrides' person slaughtering him, or sit his anger out and curb his spirit, while these thoughts strived in his blood and mind, and he his sword drew down from heaven. Athena stooped and shined about his temple, being sent by thievery-wristed queen Saturnia, who out of her heart had ever-loving been, and careful of the good of both. She stood behind and took Achilles by the yellow curls, and only gave her look. To him appearance not a man of all the rest could see. He turning back his eye, amaze struck every faculty. Yet straight he knew her by her eyes, so terribly they were, sparkling with ardour, and thus spake, thou seed of Jupiter. Why comest thou? To behold his pride and boast, Sir Empery? Then witness with it my revenge, and see that insolence die, that lives to wrong me. She replied, I came from heaven to see thy anger settled, if thy soul will use her sovereignty. In fit reflection I sent from Juno, whose effects stand heartily inclined to both. Come, give us both respects, and cease contention, draw no sword, use words, and such as may be bitter to his pride, but just for trust in what I say. A time shall come when thrice the worth of that he forceth now, he shall propose for recompense of these wrongs. Therefore throw reins on thy passion and serve us. He answered through my heart, burn just anger, yet my soul must conquer every part, and yield ye conquest, who subdues his earthly part for heaven. Heaven to his prayers subdued his wish. This said, the change was given. Fit honour in his silver hilt, he held his able hand, and forced his broadsword up, and up to heaven did reascend. Minerva, who in Jove's high roof that bears the rough shield took, her place with other deities she gone again forsook. Patience his passion, and no more his silence could confine his wrath, that his broad language gave, though ever steeped in wine. Dog's face with heart, but of a heart that nor in th' open eye of fight darst thrust into a peace, nor with our noblest lie in secret ambush. These works seem too full of death for thee. 'Tis safer far in the open host to dare an injury to any crosser of thy lust, thou subject-eating king. Base spirits thou govern'st, or this wrong hath been the last foul thing thou ever authoredst. Yet I vow, and by a greater oath swear, even by the sceptre, that as this never again shall bear green leaves or branches, nor increase with any growth his size, nor did since first it left the hills and had his faculties, and ornaments bereft with iron, which now to the other end judges of Greece bear, and their laws received from Jove defend, from which my oath to thee is great, so whenever so need shall burn with thirst, of me thy host no prayers shall ever breed. Affection in me that to their aid, though well-deserved woes, afflict thee for them, when to death manslaughtering Hector throws whole troops on them, and thou torments thy vexed mind with conceit of thy rude age now, and his wrong, that most deserved right of all thy army. Thus he threw his sceptre against the ground. With golden studs stoke, and took seat. Atreides' breast was drowned in rising colour. Up to both speaking, sweet-spoken Nestor stood, the cunning Pylian orator whose tongue poured forth a flood of more than honey sweet discourse. 2 ages were increased of divers languaged men, all born in his time deceased. In sacred Pylos, where he reigned amongst third-aged men, he well seen in the world advised and thus expressed it then. O gods, our Greek earth will be drowned in just tears, rapeful Troy. Her king in all his sons will make as just mock and joy. Of these distinctions, if of you, that all our host excel in counsel and in skill, they hear this, come, repel these young men's passions. Are not both? Put both your ears in one. So old as I lived long since, and was companion with men superior to you both, who yet would ever hear my counsels with respect. My eyes yet never witness were, nor ever will be, of such men as then delighted them: Pirithous, Exadius, and godlike Pilopheme, Caeneus, and Dryas, prince of men, Aegeon, Theseus, a man like heaven immortals formed, all most vigorous of all men that even those days bred, most vigorous men, and fought with beasts, most vigorous mountain beasts, for men's strength were naught, matched with their forces, fought with them, and bravely fought them down. Yet even with these men I conversed, being called to the renown of their societies by their suits from Pylos far, to fight in Thappian king, and I fought to a degree of might that helped even their mights against such as no man now would dare to meet in conflict, and yet even these my counsels still would hear, and with obedience crown my words. Give you such palm to them, 'tis better than wreathe your wraths. Atreides, give not stream to all thy power, nor forces prize, but yield as still his own, as all men else do. Nor do they encounter with thy crown, great son of Peleus, since no king ever Jove allowed grace of a sceptre that equals him. Suppose thy nerves endowed with strength superior on thy birth a very goddess gave, yet he of forces mightier, since what his own nerves have is amplified, and with just command of many other. King of men, command thou then thyself, and I with my prayers will obtain grace of Achilles to subdue his fury with those parts are worth of entreaty, being chief check to all our will in war. All this, good father, said the king, is comely and good right, but this man breaks all such bounds, he affects past all men height. All would in his power hold, all make his subjects give to all his hot will for their temperate law, all which he never shall persuade at my hands. If the gods given him the great style of ablest soldier, made they that his license to revile men with vile language. Thetis the son prevented him, and said, fearful and vile I might be taught, if the exactions laid, by all means on me I should bear. Others command to this, thou shalt not me, or if thou dost far me free spirit is from serving thy command. Besides this I affirm, the foreimpression of it in thy soul, will not use my words on thee or any of a wench, unjustly though thou takest the thing thou gatest, but all things else that in my ship thou makest greedy survey of, do not touch without my leave, or do add that acts wrong to this, that these may see thou art outraged too, and then comes my part. Then be sure thy blood upon my lance shall flow in vengeance. These high terms, these two at variance, used to each other, left their seats, and after them arose the whole court. To his tents and ships, with friends and soldiers goes angry Achilles. Atreus' son, the swift ship launched and put within it 20 chosen rows, within it likewise should the hecatomb appease the gods, and caused to come aboard fair-cheeked Chryseis, for the chief in whom Pallas poured her store of counsels. Ithacus aboard went last, and then the moist ways of the sea they sailed, and now the king of men gave all to host to sacrifice. They sacrificed to cast their offal of all the deeps. The angry god they graced with perfect hecatombs, some bulls, some goats along the shore of the unfruitful sea, inflamed to heaven the thick fumes bore, and wrapped savours thus, though all the politic king made show respects to heaven, yet he himself in all that time did pursue his own affections. The late jar in which he thundered threats against Achilles still he fed, and his affections' heats thus vented to Talthybius and grave Eurybates, heralds and ministers of trust, to all these messages. Haste to Achilles' tent, where take Briseis' hand, and bring her beauties to us. If he fail to yield her, say your king will come himself with multitudes that shall the horribler make both his presence and your charge, but so he dares defer. This said, he sent them with a charge of hard condition. They went unwillingly and trod the fruitless sea's shores. Soon they reached the navy and the tents in which the quarter lay. Of all the Myrmidons he found the chief in their sway. Set at his back bark in his tent, nor was Achilles glad to see their presence, nor themselves in any glory had. Their message but with reverence stalked, and feared the offended king, asked not the dame, nor spake a word. He yet, well knowing the thing, that caused their coming, graced them thus. Heralds, ye men that bear the messages of men and gods, ye are welcome, come ye near. I nothing blame you, but your king, 'tis he I know, doth send you for Briseis. She is his, Patroclus' honoured friend. Bring forth the damsel, and these men let her to their lord. But, heralds, be you witness before the most adored, before us mortals, and before you most ungentle king, of what I suffer, that if war ever hereafter bring my aid in question to avert any severest bane it brings on others, I am excused to keep mine aid in wane, since they mine honour. But your king in tempting mischief raves, nor sees at once by present things to future. How like the waves, ills follow ills, injustices being never so secure in present times, but after plagues even then are seen as sure, which yet he sees not, and so soothes his present lust, which check plagues future. And he might in succouring right protect such as fight for his right at fleet. They still in safety fight, that fight still justly. The speech used, Patroclus did the right, his friend commanded, and brought forth Briseis from her tent, gave her to the heralds, and away to archive ships they went. She sat and scarce for grief could go, her love all friends forsook, and wept for anger. To the shore and the old sea he betook, himself alone, and casting forth upon the purple sea his wet eyes, and his hands to heaven advancing, this sad plea made to his mother. Mother, since ye brought me forth to breathe so short a life, Olympus had got right to bequeath my short life honour, ye that right doth in no degree. But let's Atrides do me shame, and force that prize from me that all Greeks gave. This with tears he uttered, and she heard, set with her old sire in his deeps, and instantly appeared up from the grey sea like a cloud, sate by his side, and said, Why weeps my son? What grieves thee? Speak, conceal not what hath laid such hard hand on thee, let both know. He, sighing like a storm, replied, Thou dost know, why should I things known again inform? We marched to Thebes, the sacred town of King Aeton, sacked it and brought the fleet the spoil, which every valiant son of Greece indifferently shared. Atrides had for share fair-cheeked Chryseis. After which his priest that shoots so far, Chryseis, the far Chryseis' sire, achieved the archive fleet, with infinite ransom to redeem the dear imprisoned fleet of his fair daughter. In his hands he held Apollo's crown and golden scepter, making suit to every Grecian son, but the most sons of Atreus and the others orderers. Yet they least heard him, all the rest received with reverent ears the motion, both the priests and gifts, gracing and hold worth, his wished acceptance. Atreus' son, yet vexed, commanded forth with rude terms Phoebus' reverend priest, who angry made retreat and prayed to Phoebus, in whose grace he standing passed grace. Got his petition. The gods in ill shaft sent abroad that tumbled down the Greeks in heaps. The host had no abode that was not visited. We asked a prophet that well knew the cause of all, and from his lips Apollo's prophecies flew. Telling his anger, first myself exhorted to appease the angered god, which Atreus' son did at the heart displease. And up he stood, used threats, performed. The black-eyed Greek sent home Chryseis to her sire, and gave his god a hecatomb. Then for Briseis to my tent Atreus' heralds came, and took her that the Greeks gave all, if then thy powers can frame. Wreck for thy son afford it, scale Olympus, and implore Jove, if by either word or fact thou ever didst restore joy to his grieved heart, now to help I oft have heard thee vaunt in court of Peleus that alone thy hand was conservant. In rescue from a cruel spoil, the black cloud gathering Jove, and whom other godheads would have bound, the power whose pace doth move the round earth, heaven's great queen and Pallas, to whose bands thou campst with rescue, bringing up him with 100 hands to great Olympus, whom the gods call Briareus men, Aegeon, who his sire surpassed, and was as strong again, and in that grace sat glad by Jove. The immortals stood dismayed at his ascension, and gave free passage to his aid. Of all this tell Jove, kneeling to him, embrace his knee and pray. Of Troy's aid he will ever deign, that now their forces may beat home the Greeks in fleet and sea, enduring their retreat, in slaughter their pains pang, the reek of their proud sovereign's heat. And that far-ruling king may know from his poor soldiers harms his own harm, falls his own and all mine in his best in arms. Her answer she poured out in tears. O me, my son, said she, why brought I up thy being at all, that brought thee forth to be, sad subject of so hard a fate? O would to heaven that since thy fate is so little and not long, thou mightst without offence and tears perform it. But to live thrall to so stern a fate as grants thee least life, and that least so most unfortunate, grieves me thou given thee any life. But what thou wishest now, if Jove will grant, I'll up and ask Olympus crowned with snow. I'll climb, but sit thou fast at fleet, renounced all war, and feed thy heart with wrath and hope of wreck, till which come thou shalt need a little patience. Jupiter went yesterday to feast among the blameless Ethiops, in Ocean's deepened breast. All gods attending him, the 12th high heaven again he sees, and then his brass-paved court I'll scale, cling to his powerful knees, and doubt not but to win thy wish. Thus made she her remove, and left wrath tiring on her son for his enforced love. Ulysses with the hecatomb arrived at Chrysa's shore, and when amidst the heavens' deep mouth they came to us the oar, they straight struck sail and rolled them up, and on the hatches threw the topmast to the kelson, then with halyards down they drew. Then brought the ship to port with oars, then forked anchor cast, and against the violent storm of drifting made her fast. All come ashore, they all exposed the holy hecatomb to angry Phoebus, and with it Chryseis is welcomed home, whom to her sire wise Ithacus that did the altar stand, for honour led, and spoken thus resigned her to his hand. Chryseis, the mighty king of men, and great Agamemnon sends thy loved seed by hands to thine, and to thy god commends a hecatomb, which my charge is to sacrifice and seek. A much sigh mixed, woe his rescue invoked by every Greek. Thus he resigned her, and her sire received her highly joyed. But the well-built altar then they orderly employed. The sacred offering washed their hands, took salt cakes, and the priest, with hands held up to heaven, thus prayed, O that all things seest, fortor of Chrysa, whose fair hand doth guard fully dispose celestial cilia, governing in all power Tenedos, O hear thy priest, and as thy hand in free grace to my prayers shot fervent plague shafts through the Greeks, now hearten their affairs. With health renewed and quite remove the infection from their blood. He prayed, and to his prayers again the god propitious stood. All after prayer cast on salt cheeks, drew back, killed flayed their beeves, cut out and dubbed with fat their thighs, fresh dressed with doubled leaves, and on them all the sweet breads pricked the priest with small sear wood, did sacrifice poured on red wine, by whom the young men stood, and in turn in 5 ranks spits, on which the legs enough they eat the inwards. Then in giggets cut the other fit for meat, and put to fire, which roasted well they drew. The labour done, they served the feast, in that fed all to satisfaction. Desire of meat and wine thus quenched, the youths crowned cups of wine drunk off and filled again to all. The day was held divine, and spent in paeans to the sun, who heard with pleased ear, when ewes whose bright chariots stooped to sea, and twilight hid the clear, and soundly on their cables slept, even till the night was worn, and when the Lady of the Light, the rosy-fingered morn, rose from the hills all fresh arose, and to the camp retired, Apollo with a foreright wind their swelling bark inspired. The topmast hoisted, milk-white sails on his round breast they put, the mizzen strutted with the gale, the ship her course did cut. So swiftly, that the parted waves against her ribs did roar, which coming to the camp, they drew aloft the sandy shore, where laid on stocks each soldier kept his quarter as before, but Peleus' son, swift-footed Achilles, at his swift shift sate, burning in wrath, nor ever came to councils of a state. That make men honoured never trod the fierce and battle field, but kept close and his loved heart pinned, what fight and cries could yield. Thirsting at all parts to the host, and now since first he told his wrongs to Thetis, 12 fair morns their ensigns did unfold, and then the ever-living gods mounted Olympus, Jove, first in ascension, Thetis then remembered well to move. Achilles' motion rose from the sea, and by morn's first light the great heaven and Olympus climbed, where in supremest height of all that many-headed ill she saw the far-seen sun of Saturn set from all the rest in his free seat alone, before whom on her own knees fallen the knees of Jupiter. Her left hand held, her right his chin, and thus she did prefer her son's petition. Father Jove, if ever have I stood, aidful to thee in word or work, with this implored good. Requite my aid, renown my son, since in so short a race, past others thou confinest his life, and insolence disgrace is done him by the king of men. He forced him from a prize, one with his sword, but thou, O Jove, that art most strong, most wise, honour my son for my sake, add strength to the Trojan side, by his side's weakness, in his want, and see his Troy amplified. In conquest so much, so long, till Greece may give again the glory reft him, and the more illustrate the free reign of his wronged honour. Jove at sate silent, not a word, in long space past him. Thetis still hung on his knee, implored the second time his help, and said, Grant or deny my suit, be free in what thou dost, I know I canst not sit this mute. For fear of any speak deny, that I so may be sure. Of all heaven's goddesses, 'tis I that only must endure dishonour by thee, Jupiter, the great cloud-gatherer grieved. With thought of what a world of griefs with this suit asked, being achieved, swelled, sighed, and answered, Works of death thou urgest, oh, at this, Juno will storm, and all my powers inflame with contumelies. Ever she wrangles, charging me in ear of all the gods, that I am partial still, that I add the displeasing odds of my aid to the Ilians. Begone then, lest this she see. Leave thy request to my care, yet that trust may hearten thee. With thy desires grant, and my power to give it act approve, how vain her strife is. To thy prayer my eminent head shall move, which is the great sign of my will with all the mortal states. Irrevocable, never fails, never without the rates of all powers else. When my head bows, all heads bow with it still. As their first mover, and gives power to any work I will. He said, and his black eyebrows bent above his deathless head. The ambrosian curls flowed. Great heaven shook, and both was severed. Their counsels broken, to the depth of Neptune's kingdom dived, Thetis from heaven's height, Jove arose, and all the gods were saved. All rising from their thrones, their sire attending to his court. None sate when he rose, none delayed the furnishing his port. Till he came near, all met with him and brought him to his throne. Nor sate great Juno ignorant, when she beheld alone old Nereus' silver-footed seed with Jove that she had brought. Counsels to heaven, and straight her tongue had teeth in it that wrought this sharp invective. Who was that, thou craftiest counsellor of all the gods, that so apart some secret did implore? Ever apart from me thou lov'st to counsel and decree things of more close trust than thou think'st are fit to impart to me. Whatever thou determinest, I must ever be denied the knowledge of it by thy will. To her speech thus replied the father of both men and gods, I've never hoped to know my whole intentions, though my wife. It fits not, nor would show well to thine own thoughts, but what fits thy woman's ear to hear, woman nor man nor god shall know before it grace thine ear. Yet what apart from men and gods I please to know forbear, to examine or inquire of that. She with cows fair eyes. Respected Juno thus returned, austere king of the skies, what hadst thou uttered? When did I before this time inquire or sift thy counsels? Passing close you are still, your desire is served with such care that I fear you can scarce vouch the deed that makes it public, being seduced by this old sea-god seed, that could so early use her knees embracing thine. I doubt of late act of thy bowed head was for the working out of some boon she asked, that her son thy partial hand would please with plaguing others. Wretch, said he, thy subtle jealousies are still exploring my designs, can never escape thine eye, which yet thou never canst prevent. Thy curiosity makes thee less card for at my hands, and horrible the end that shall make thy humour. If it be what thy suspects intend, what then? 'Tis my free will it should, to which let way be given. With silence, curb your tongue in time, lest all the gods in heaven too few be and too weak to help thy punished insolence. When my inaccessible hands shall fall on thee, the sense of this high threatening made her fear, and silence she set down, humbling her great heart. All the gods in court of Jove did frown at this offence given, amongst whom heaven's famous artisan Hephaestus in his mother's care this comely speech began. Believe it, these words will breed wounds beyond our powers to bear. If thus for mortals ye fall out, ye make a tumult here, that spoils our banquet, evermore worst matters put down best. But mother, though yourself be wise, yet lest your son request his wisdom audience, give good terms to our loved father Jove, for fear he take offence again, and our kind banquet prove a wrathful battle. If he will, the heavenly lightner can take you and toss you from your throne. His power Olympian is so surpassing. Soften then with gentle speech his spleen, and drink to him. I know his heart will quickly down again. This said, arising from his throne, in his loved mother's hand he put the double-handed cup, and said, Come, do not stand. On these cross humours suffer bear, though your great bosom grieve. And lest blows force you, all my aid not able to relieve. Your hard condition, though these eyes behold it, in this heart sorrow to think it. 'Tis a task too dangerous to take part against Olympius. I myself the proof of this still feel. When other gods would fain have helped, he took me by the heel and hurled me out of heaven. All day I was in falling down, at length in Lemnos I struck earth, the likewise falling sun, and I together set my life almost set too. Yet there the Sinti cheered and took me up. This did the laughter cheer. White-wristed Juno, who now took the cup of him and smiled, the sweet peacemaking draught went round, and lame Hephaestus filled nectar to all the other gods. A laughter never left. Shook all the blessed deities to see the lame so deft. At that cup service, all that day, even till the sun went down, they banqueted, and had such cheer as did their wishes crown. Nor had they music less divine. Apollo there did touch his most sweet harp, to which with voice the muses pleased as much. But when the sun's fair light was set, each godhead to his house, addressed for sleep, where every one at art most curious. By heaven's great both-foot halting god a several roof had built. E'en he to sleep went, by whose heaven hand is with lightning gilt. High Jove, where he had us to rest, when sweet sleep seized his eyes. By him the golden throne queen slept, the queen of deities. Thus ends the first book, and hopefully you enjoyed that. I'll be doing a book-by-book reading if it's something that I see people are wanting and people gain some attention to. All right, guys. Have a good night.